We saw that George Pearson, I'm reading from page number 47. We saw that George Pearson, when he came home, he had been told the truth by his wife, that people in the club, they call him Pompey Pearson, and he was a standing jokes for them. Not only that, they actually make fun of him. At this, he was very much, shocked, and he went out of that room. And in the meantime, Mrs. Pearson had come, Mrs. Fitzgerald had come to their house, and they were talking and all this. Now here we should start from here, that George entered, slept gloomily. Gloomily means sadly, page number 47. That George Pearson again entered the room gloomily, sadly. He is unpleasantly surprised when he sees the visitor, and after coming into that room, he saw that Mrs. Fitzgerald was sitting there. So he was unpleasantly surprised. He moves to the armchair left, sits down heavily, and gloomily lights his pipe. He moves to the armchair and sits there, just lighted his pipe. Then he looks from Mrs. Pearson to Mrs. Fitzgerald, who is regarding him anxiously, and he looked to Mrs. Pearson and then to Mrs. Fitzgerald. Don't forget that here that Mrs. Fitzgerald was actually Mrs. Pearson, and it was his real wife. So his real wife was looking at him anxiously. And then what happened? George just looked in for a minute, I suppose, Mrs. Fitzgerald. So he asked this to Mrs. Fitzgerald, because his wife was apparently looking like Fitzgerald. So he asked Fitzgerald that just looked in for a minute, means you have come for a minute, I feel, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Now Mrs. Fitzgerald, actually Mrs. Fitzgerald told, who doesn't know what he is saying? Well, yes, I suppose so, George. Now actually Mrs. Fitzgerald was real Mrs. Pearson, and Mrs. Pearson used to call her husband as George. So out of that habit, actually, though she was looking like Mrs. Fitzgerald, but she was not Mrs. Fitzgerald, she was real Pearson. So she actually, out of that habit, she called her husband as by his name, the George. That yes, I suppose so, George. At this, George aghast means George was terrified at and told George, because Mrs. Fitzgerald did not address George by his name. So when Mrs. Fitzgerald called him as George, he was surprised and told George. Now Fitzgerald nervously, and Fitzgerald told actual Pearson, she nervously, I'm sorry. Now she actually understood that she should behave as Mrs. Fitzgerald and should address her husband as Mrs. Fitzgerald generally addresses him, but she had not done it. So she was actually she actually realized that she had done a mistake, and she got nervous. I'm sorry. Now Mrs. Pearson, actually Mrs. Pearson, real Fitzgerald, she told impatiently, losing her patience, what does it matter? Your name is George, isn't it? Who do you think you are? Duke of Edinburgh? Now here wife insulted George by telling that what is the problem? If Mrs. Fitzgerald has addressed you, has called you by your name, so what's the problem? Your name is George, and that is why she had called you as George. Who do you think? Duke of Edinburgh? Now Edinburgh was a province in England, you should know, and Duke is just like the Jamindar, the owner, the landlord of Edinburgh. So Duke of Edinburgh. Now George became very angry. What he's got to do with it? George is really angry because he had been insulted by his wife also. So here now became more angry because wife is telling this in front of an outsider. What's he got to do with it? Just tell me that. And isn't it bad enough without her calling me George? And he was telling this to his wife. Isn't it bad enough that he is calling me George by my name? Naughty, Pompey Pearson. And poor Doris has been crying her eyes out upstairs. Yes, crying her eyes out. Now, he had lots of grievances against his wife, because his wife had treated him badly. Not only that, his wife had told him what actually the club members actually think about him. So he was very much angry with his wife, and he had lots of grievances against it. Now the wife had started again in front of the outsider. That made him more angry, and he told that, yes, no tea ready, you did not prepare any tea for me, you were telling me Pompey Pearson, even Doris is crying her eyes out upstairs. These are all happening for you. Now at this, Mrs. Fitzgerald willing, Mrs. Fitzgerald means his real wife, Mrs. Pearson. Oh dear, I ought to have known. I ought to means I should have known. Now the wife was very much anxious, and the wife told, I should have known. Now George staring at her annoyed, and George was staring because the way she was talking, Mrs. Fitzgerald did not talk such a way. You ought to have known. Why ought to? Why ought you to have known? Now George was very much surprised why Mrs. Fitzgerald was behaving like this, and that is why he was asking to Fitzgerald that why ought you to have known? Nothing to do with you, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Look, we are at 6s and 7s here just now, so perhaps you will excuse us. Now here 6s and 7s is an idiom. It means in a haphazard way, in a chaotic situation, in a confusing situation. So Mr. George wanted to tell this to Mrs. Fitzgerald that we are in a chaotic situation, in a confusing situation, so it would be better if you excuse us. Now Pearson, before Mrs. Fitzgerald can reply, now Pearson means her wife told this before she could reply. I wouldn't excuse you, George Pearson. Now wife is now chiding, now insulting, scolding the husband in front of the outsider. The wife is telling, I wouldn't excuse you, Mr. George Pearson. Next time a friend and neighbor comes to see me, just say something when you see her. Good evening, or how do you do, or something. And don't just march in and sit down without a word. It's bad manners. Now here the wife was teaching these, wife was telling this in front of the outsider. The wife told, what he had told, that I would not excuse you. Next time a friend and neighbors come, you must say a few words such as good evening or how do you do. And you must not come here much, you must not come in and sit without exchanging any word. You should learn it because this is bad manners. The wife told this in front of this neighbor. Now Fitzgerald nervous. No, it's all right. Now Fitzgerald was his real wife. Fitzgerald was real Pearson. So Pearson was very much anxious to see that that her husband had been scolded by Mrs. Fitzgerald, and she told, no, it's all right. Now Pearson, no, it's all right. No, it isn't all right. We will have some decent manners in this house, or I will know the reason why. Glaring at George. Well, now the wife is getting angry, and the wife is telling to the husband, no, it's not decent manners, it's not right, because we must have decent manners, means gentle manners at our house. You should know this, or I will know the reason, and I want to know why we shouldn't have these decent manners. And he was glaring means looking angrily towards George. Well, now George intimated means getting frightened. George was very much frightened of his wife and told, well, what? Now George also could not understand how wife was behaving, and he asked, what? Now Pearson, taunting him. Now Pearson is telling, the wife is telling, why don't you get up to your club? Special night tonight, isn't it? They will be waiting for you, wanting to have a good laugh. Go on then, don't disappoint them. Now here, taunting, teasing. Here wife was teasing the husband, and the wife told the husband, why you are waiting here? You go to the club. The club members are waiting for you. They want you there to laugh at you. Don't disappoint them. Go there. Why? What you are doing there? What you are doing here? You told that you are having a special night tonight. So go there. Why you are wasting your time? That wife was taunting or teasing the husband in such a way. Now George bitterly, that's right. Make me look silly in front of her. Now the wife, now the husband is telling to the wife, now that's good, you are making silly, make me fool in front of the neighbor of her. Now her means Mrs. Fitzgerald had come, so make me fool in front of her. Go on, don't mind me, go on, don't mind anything. 6s and 7s means we are in confusing state. Poor Doris been crying her eyes out. Poor Doris has been crying out her eyes. Getting the neighbors in to see the fun, and in front of the neighbor you are just taunting me, teasing me like this. You have called her to see the fun, that's good. Suddenly losing her temper and glaring at Mrs. Pearson and shouting. Now he had been, as I told, that he had lots of grievances, he had tolerated so far, but now when he had been teased in front of that in front of the neighbor, he could not tolerate it anymore, and he lost his temper and he shouted, all right, let her hear it. What's the matter with you? Have you gone barmy or what? Now he shouted at his wife and told, okay, let her hear what is going on. Her means here Fitzgerald. He told to his wife that let Mrs. Fitzgerald hear it, what is going on. And then he asked to his wife, what is going on? What's the matter with you? Have you gone barmy? Barmy means mad. Have you gone mad or what? What has happened to you? Now Pearson jumping up savagely. Now at this, Pearson, the wife, we know that it is not his real wife. It was rough and tough Mrs. Fitzgerald. But still here, jumping up savagely. Savagely means wildly. The wife actually stood up. If you shout at me like that, George Pearson, I will slap your big fat silly face. Oh, this is too much. The wife threatened the husband that if you shout like these, I will slap you at your silly fat face. It must be very much insulting to a husband when wife threatens him to slap at his face in front of somebody else. Now Fitzgerald moaning, oh, no, please, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Mrs. Pearson sits. Now Mrs. Fitzgerald told this, no, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Here also there is a slip of tongue. Here in that confusion, when Mrs. Pearson saw that her husband had been, bitterly, actually roughly behaved by somebody else, Mrs. Fitzgerald, so she could not control, and she had forgotten that she should behave like Mrs. Fitzgerald, because she was not original Fitzgerald, but she should behave like Fitzgerald, but she could not control this. She had forgotten all these, and she told that no, please, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Now here it's written Mrs. Fitzgerald, because we know that was not Mrs. Fitzgerald, that was actually real Pearson, but George did not know, because she was looking like Fitzgerald. So here George also got confused. What is it? Fitzgerald is telling to Fitzgerald? No, George told, staring at her, bewildered, George was looking at Mrs. Fitzgerald, and he was surprised. Either I am off my chump or you two are. Now he was telling to both his wife and Mrs. Fitzgerald that either I am off my chump or you two are. You are off my chump means you have forgotten, or you two are like this. How do you mean? No, Pearson, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Look, you are Mrs. Fitzgerald. Now at this, George told to Mrs. Fitzgerald, look, how do you mean? No, please, Mrs. Fitzgerald. Look, you are Mrs. Fitzgerald. So why are you telling yourself to stop when you are not doing anything? Now here told that, look, you are Mrs. Fitzgerald. Here George was telling this to Mrs. Fitzgerald, that you are Mrs. Fitzgerald. So why are you telling yourself to stop when you are not doing anything? Now George was telling this to Fitzgerald, that I got bewildered, I am surprised, I can't understand whether I have got mad or you two have gone mad. Why are you telling yourself to stop where you are not doing anything? Tell her to stop, then there would be some sense in it. And George Pearson told this to Fitzgerald, that you should tell her, means you should tell to my wife to stop, because actually then it would be sense, then there would be some sense in it. Why you are actually telling yourself to stop when you have not done anything. Now staring at Mrs. Pearson, now he was staring at Mrs. Pearson to his wife. I think you must be tiddly. Tiddly means drunk. I feel you have drunk. He was telling this to his wife. Now Pearson, staring at savagely, and Pearson now, he was looking at him and wildly. Say that again, George Pearson. The wife was telling this to the husband. Say that again, what you have told, George Pearson. Say that again. Now George, intimidated. Intimidated means got angry. Got frightened again. All right. Means he wanted to neutralize the situation. Now Doris entered, slept slowly. That time Doris came, the daughter. He had heavily been insulted by her mother. Now she came in looking miserable, and she was really looking miserable. She was looking sad. She is still wearing the wrap. Wrap means that outer dress. She was still wearing it. And Mrs. Pearson sits on the settee, and Mrs. Pearson was sitting there. Now Fitzgerald, hello, Doris dear. Now Fitzgerald told this, addressed this by telling that, oh, Doris dear. Now Doris miserably, sadly, hello, Mrs. Fitzgerald, hello, Mrs. Fitzgerald, like this. And Doris was very sad, because she had been ill-treated. She had been roughly treated by her mother, and she was not intended to talk to an outsider like Mrs. Fitzgerald. Now she just told formally, hello. Now Fitzgerald, I thought you were going out with Charlie Spence tonight, because now Fitzgerald told, I thought that you had a plan to go out with Charlie Spence that night. Yes, it was her real mother. So the real mother knew that my daughter should go with Charlie Spence, or my daughter would go with Charlie Spence that evening, so that night. So actually the mother asked that, sister, actually you had a plan to go out with Charlie Spence that night? Now Doris annoyed. What's that to do with you? Now Doris was very much annoyed, because Doris also had very much grievances against her mother, but she could not express it. She was very much afraid of her mother also. So when Mrs. Fitzgerald asked this, that what happened? You had a plan to go out with Charlie Spence. So what's the problem? At this, Doris became annoyed and told, "You are what's that? What's that to do with you?" Doris asked this to Mrs. Fitzgerald. Doris told this, what's the problem with you? Now, Mrs. Pearson, stop that! Certainly, Mrs. Pearson means the mother. Stop that! Now, Fitzgerald now does, no, it's all right. Actually, Fitzgerald is the real mother here, real Pearson. So, she was very much anxious, she was very much agitated, and she was feeling sorry that how her husband and even her daughter had been treated roughly by Mrs. Fitzgerald. And she told her, no, it's all right, it's all right. Now, Pearson, severely, it isn't all right. Severely means getting serious. The wife was, and the mother was telling, I wouldn't have a daughter of mine talking to anybody like that. And the mother told, I don't want a daughter like these, that who would talk to others like these. Now answer Mrs. Fitzgerald properly, Doris, or go upstairs again. Her mother was very strict, and that they already realized, Doris had already realized that mother had become all of a sudden very strict, and now mother was scolding her that you should behave properly with Mrs. Fitzgerald, or if you can't, then you must go upstairs again. Now Doris looking wonderingly at her father, and Doris was looking at her father as if Doris wanted the help from her father. Now George, in despair means in utter frustration, George, don't look at me. I give it up. I just gave it up. I just gave it up. Now George told, I gave it up. I just gave it up. Now Pearson, fierce. Well, answer her. The mother was telling this. Answer her. Now Doris sulkily, I was going out with Charlie Spence tonight, but now I have called it off. Now Doris had to answer it, because she was very much afraid of mother. And now Doris told this to Fitzgerald, that I was going out with Charlie Spence tonight, but now I have called it off. He told, yes, I have called off means cancelled. I used to go with Charlie Spence, but I have cancelled it. Now Fitzgerald, oh, what a pity, dear, why have you A mother is asking this to the daughter. Why have you? What had happened to you? Why have you? Now Doris, with a flash of temper, because if you must know, my mother has been going on at mimicking me, feel miserable, and saying he has got buck teeth and is half-witted. And Doris got very angry and told, really, if you want to know this, then you should ask my mother, who had mimicking me, means who had made me so much disappointed by telling that my boyfriend Charlie Spence is a buck teeth and half-witted. Now Fitzgerald, rather bolder to Mrs. Pearson, oh, you shouldn't have said that. Now Fitzgerald told this to, actually Pearson here told this to Fitzgerald, you shouldn't have told that. Now Pearson sharply, Mrs. Fitzgerald, I will manage my family, you manage yours. Now here Fitzgerald told to actual Pearson, no, I am managing my family, though it's not her family, but still when Pearson was indulging in that, so Fitzgerald actually warned Pearson, I am managing my family, you just manage yours. Now George is now grimly ticking her off now. Are you? Any ticking means making angry. Now George got on point when Mrs. Fitzgerald told this to Mrs. Pearson, or here Mrs. Pearson told this to Fitzgerald, that I am managing my family. At this, George got this point, and George told this to his wife. Now you are making her angry. You know, when I was telling her that why you have called me George, that you taught me, and now you are making her angry. Now Pearson, now wife, even more grimly, the wife is telling this now. They are waiting for you at the club, George. Don't forget, and don't you start crying again, Doris. Now mother was telling her, wife told this to the husband. What you are waiting for here? You go there. You know they are waiting for at the club. You go and don't forget, and don't you start crying again. And she told this to the daughter. Okay. Now, Mrs. Fitzgerald getting up with sudden decision. That's enough. Quite enough. Now, mother actually stood up and told, that's enough. Quite enough. Now, George and Doris stared at her bewildered. George and Doris was looking at. So, today, up to this, I hope you have understood. So today we are leaving it here, and next day again we will continue where we are leaving it today. And wish you a Merry Christmas. Stay happy and enjoy it. Thank you for joining my class.